Today we will talk about Marx's ideas about democracy because it's widely believed that he abominated the very idea of democracy. And there are a number of communist party that are averse to the very idea of going to the parliament, and they think that the parliament is just a chamber for the bourgeoisie or a place where they hold the meeting of the board of governors, which naturally protects their legal interests. But Marx's ideas about democracy do not reflect his aversion towards democracy. For instance, in March 1850, addressing the Communist League, Marx advised workers of Germany to contest polls. Marx said the Workers' Party should put up candidates for elections in Germany in the event of the creation of a National Assembly as a result of revolutionary upheaval. Even when there is no prospect whatsoever of their being elected, the workers must put up their own candidates in order to preserve their independence, to count their forces, and to bring before the public their revolutionary attitude and party standpoint. It seems that German workers paid heed to what Marx had advised, and in the elections of 1871, Social Democratic Party secured over 100,000 votes, 352,000 votes in the election of 1874, and 493,000 in the election of 1877. Marx was euphoric over the results, and in the class struggle in France, he wrote, the results of the polls had frightened the German state, forcing it to impose anti-socialist law. He said by showing their strength in the polls, the German workers had taught their fellow comrades the use of a new weapon, which is the sharpest, the weapon of vote. One needs to go through Marx and Engels' selected works, volume 2, where Marx said the winning of universal suffrage of democracy as one of the first and the most important tasks of the militant proletariat, and lastly had again taken up this point. Now, when Bismarck found himself compelled to introduce this franchise, the only means of interesting the mass of the people in his plans, our workers immediately took it in earnest and sent August Bebel to the first constituent Reichstag. And from that day on, they have used the enfranchise in a way which has paid them 1,000-folds and has served as a model to the workers of all countries. The franchise has been, in the words of a French Marxist program, transformed by them from a means of deception which it was into an instrument of emancipation. He further goes on to say, with this successful utilization of universal suffrage, however, an entirely new method of proletarian struggle came into operation, and this method quickly developed further. It was found that the state institutions in which the rule of the bourgeoisie organized offered the working class still further opportunities to fight these very state institutions. The workers took part in elections to particular diet, to municipal councils, and to trade courts. They contested with the bourgeoisie every post in the occupation of which a sufficient power of the proletariat had a say. And so it happened that the bourgeoisie and the government came to be much more afraid of the legal than the illegal actions of the Workers' Party, of the results of the election than of those of rebellion. It may be interesting for those who insist on bringing about a revolution by an organized tiny minority to read what Marx said about such things. The time of surprise attacks of revolutions carried through by small conscious minorities at the head of unconscious masses is past. In order that masses may understand what is to be done, long persistent work is required, and it is just this work that we are now pursuing, and with the success which drives the enemy to despair. German elections and the participations of workers in such polls encouraged other socialist parties to revisit their strategies. Marx wrote, in the Latin American country also it is being realized more and more that old tactics must be revised Everywhere, the German example of utilizing the suffrage, of winning all posts accessible to us, has been imitated. Everywhere, the unprepared launching of an attack has been relegated to the background. In France, where more than 100 years the ground has been undermined by revolution after revolution, where there is not a single party which has not done its share in conspiracies, insurrections, and all other revolutionary actions, it is done in France, where as a result the government is by no means sure of army, where in general the conditions for an insurrectionary coup d'etat men are far more favorable than in Germany. Even in France, the socialists are realizing more and more that no lasting victory is possible for them unless, sorry, no passing victory unless they first win the great mass of the people. That is, in this case, the peasants. Slow propaganda work and parliamentary activities are recognized here too as the immediate task of the party. Successes were not lacking. Not only have a whole series of municipal councils been won, 50 socialists have seats in the chambers, and they have already thrown three ministries and a president of the republic. In Belgium last year, the workers forced the adoption of franchise and have been victorious in a quarter of the constituencies. In Switzerland, in Italy, in Denmark, yes, even in Bulgaria and Romania, the socialists are represented in the parliaments. Anti-democracy rhetoric of many on the left cannot be substantiated by Marx writing. This is what some critics believe. One could find Marxist writers who were critical towards democracy, but even those views have to be read in proper context. One must not forget initially enfranchisement was granted with strings, and women who constituted a big part of working class in Europe and other industrial places did not get such rights until 1917. Of course, there were exceptions where countries like Canada, New Zealand, and the US, where counties or maybe in some towns women may have the right of the vote. But as a country, perhaps the USSR was the first that granted that right. It is because of this that they see limited benefits for working class in democracy. For instance, commenting over universal suffrage, Engels said in the introduction of the class struggle in France, if universal suffrage had offered no other advantage than that it allowed us to count our numbers every 3 years, that by the regularly established unexpectedly rapid rise in our vote, it increased in equal measures the workers' certainty of victory and the dismay of their opponents, and so became our best means of propaganda, that it accurately informed us of our own strength and that of all opposing parties, and thereby provided us with a measure of proportion second to none for our actions, safeguarding us from untimely timidity as much as from untimely foolhardiness. If this had been the only advantage we gained from the suffrage, it would still have been much more than enough. But it did more than this by far. In election propaganda, it provided us with a means second to none of getting in touch with the mass of the people where they still stand aloof from us, of forcing all parties to defend their views and action against our attacks before all the people, and further it provided our representatives in the Reichstag with a platform from which they could speak to their opponents in parliament and to the masses outside with quite a different authority and freedom than in the press or at meetings. Of that avail was their anti-socialist law to the government that the bourgeoisie when election campaigning and and socialist speeches in the Reichstag continually broke through it. One needs to keep the Germany of 1860s and to 1890s while reading these comments of Engels, where social democratic party is banned and anti-workers legislation clauses closes all avenues of peaceful struggle for the masses. It is in such a repressive environment where Engels sees very few advantages of democracy. Had there been a fully functional democracy, he may not have said it. Similarly, Lenin, who is thought to have given the idea of revolution through the vigorous, organized, and dedicated minority, also find limited advantages of democracy. In 1905, soon after the formation of Duma, he said, "We shall not refuse to go into the second Duma when or if it is convenient. We shall not refuse to utilize this arena, but we shall not exaggerate its modest importance. On the contrary, guided by the experience already provided by history, we shall entirely subordinate the struggle we wage in the Duma to another form of struggle, namely strikes, uprising, etc." The Duma had been formed in a way that it enabled feudal to get majority. Lenin initially had opposed going to Duma, but later agreed to become its part. Again, it is Russia of 1905, where repressive rules of Tsar hold the sway. It was not a fully functional democracy. So given this all, it has to be seen, one can draw his own conclusion, but there are critics or historians who believe that had Marx been alive and had universal suffrage been extended to all people in the Western countries during Marx's time, his anti-democracy, views, whatever there may be or there may have been, would have been completely different. So I leave it up to you to. I think this is just a question, so there could be more research, more efforts need to be made to probe into the matter.